All right. So formally, welcome to our SOR 3 follow-up and discharge GPRA training. We are going to walk you through some important things related to that tool. But first things first, let's introduce you to who's here today. On the right, that's me. I'm Cheryl Winston. My pronouns are she and her. And you might have seen in the chat, I'm a research manager at Omni, and I lead the SOR evaluation team and the TA team. And I'd love for my colleagues who might be new faces to you all to introduce themselves.
I'm Amanda. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a research associate with Omni, and I'm a TA specialist with the SOR treatment team. I'm excited to meet y'all and get into work with y'all.
Good morning. My name is Sacha Tripathi, and I'm also a research associate at Omni and a TA specialist for the SOR treatment team. And I'm excited to work with everybody today.
Cool. And just to remind everybody, Omni itself is the evaluation partner with DBHDS for the state opioid response funding in Virginia in the areas of not only treatment, but also prevention and recovery. And we've been partners since 2019 as part of that evaluation. So these fine folks might be here today. I'm not sure, but if they are, hello, Mike Zohab and Angela Waite from DBHDS. They may pop in now or later. Just wanted to say hello while I had a moment. And now I'll turn it over to Amanda, who's going to get us rolling into the training.
Thanks, Cheryl. So first, we just wanted to take a moment to tell you all a bit about Omni as an organization. We're a nonprofit that consults on research, evaluation, and capacity building to support our clients in data-driven social change. We understand that data is powerful in driving effective solutions to complex social challenges. We work with a range of clients from nonprofits to governments. And like Cheryl mentioned earlier, since 2019, we've been the evaluation partner with DBHDS for statewide opioid response funding in Virginia, actually across prevention, treatment, and recovery efforts. So we'll start our time off together today by going over training logistics and objectives. We'll explain Omni's role as technical assistance providers, and then we'll get into the GPRA. First, we'll provide an overview of the GPRA, give some tips for administering it, then dive into the details of the follow-up and discharge GPRAs. We'll look at unique administrative considerations for the follow-up and discharge GPRAs. We'll talk about available tools to engage clients in the completion process. Then we'll talk through how GPRA data is tracked and how Omni keeps y'all in the loop about the data that's coming in from those GPRAs. And lastly, we'll give some next steps and have a little time for questions. We'll have a break in here as well. So what do we need to know about our training today? We'll train together for about an hour and a half. And with the dense agenda that we just went over, as you can probably expect, we will likely fill all of the time. If you have any questions as we're moving through material, please share them in the chat box, or you can use the Zoom function to raise your hand. And we'll either respond via chat or we'll pause and respond to it during the presentation. The presentation is being recorded and will be made available to you and your staff on the SOR support website. And we'll announce via a little news post on the website when those materials are available. Let us know if you have a question as we're moving along. Chances are others have the same question. So we'll make sure to get that answered whether in the moment or afterwards if needed. And other than that, just standard Zoom etiquette applies. Keep yourself muted unless you'd like to speak to improve audio quality. So our objectives are that after today, you'll leave with an understanding of the goals of the SOR grant and your role in meeting them, that you'll know what the GPRA is and its relationship to the client and to the grant, that you'll have more confidence in administering the GPRA with clients, and that you'll know where to get TA and support on the GPRA administration and your workflow. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Swetcha.
All right, I'm going to jump into explaining what Omni's role is within the SOR evaluation and with collecting GPRA data, as well as your role. We'll also go into how folks can easily receive technical assistance or TA from our SOR support team at Omni. Omni has three main roles in this process. First, we're responsible for managing the GPRA data and reporting it. To do so, we develop processes on how to track the GPRA data and report it to SAMHSA. We're also responsible for offering any trainings or technical assistance on GPRA administration to agencies, and this can include webinars or reminders about intake and follow-up surveys. We'll go more in depth on what technical assistance is and how to request it shortly here. And lastly, we provide you with support and resources around GPRA data collection. We can support you through email or by having a one-to-one meeting with us. And transitioning into the roles of CSVs, these are the high-level responsibilities that all agencies should keep in mind. These responsibilities include administering the GPRA to all eligible clients who should receive the GPRA, which are clients receiving SOR-funded services. Complete a quarterly online survey that the main treatment or recovery contacts at your agency will take responsibility for. Omni does send out the survey link by email each quarter as a reminder. Some questions will stay the same each quarter and some are unique to each quarterly survey. And lastly, to use the GPRA data to support your work. Ultimately, the data helps you all learn more about your clients' stories in life to better connect them to the key services they need to get well and transition into recovery. And here's a little glimpse of our website or portal at virginiasorsupport.org. Please check out the website. It likely has majority of the resources that you'll need. It has information about SOR and Omni, news, reports, resources, guidance on using our Dropbox folder, and a form to request technical assistance. If you have any questions for us, you can also use the TA request form on the upper right of the web page that green arrow is pointing to. Also, if you have new staff that need to get trained, you can use the TA request form on the website, and we'll send that person some orientation materials and get them added to all the right communication lists. And as you can see, there's a plethora of resources on our website, so take some time to browse around. This slide lists many of them, and you can locate all of these under the resources tab. We'll also get the recording of this training, as we mentioned before, added, and we'll get into some more resources later on. Now, what is technical assistance? Some of the things we can help out with are one-on-one TA, so answering any GPRA questions as they come up, and making contact updates due to staff changes at your agency. So things like adding staff to your CSV's Dropbox folder and getting them on the news updates email list. But really anything you need help with, we are here, and there's no such thing as a silly question or too much TA. Again, feel free to use the request TA option on the homepage of our website. It also includes a drop-down option in the request TA form where you can choose for us to email you an encrypted email under what kind of TA are you seeking. And that encrypted email request is used just in case we need to include private information about a client, such as an ID or a birth date. And here are some ways we stay connected with you, plus the best practice item at the end. First, we'll reach out through website news posts, and these come from the SOR support email address in the form of a newsletter too, but sometimes they can get marked as spam because we sent them out through MailChimp, an e-newsletter company, so please look out for that. You can subscribe to this on our website by going to News and Virginia SOR Support. It's a big orange button, but we still add all staff to this list just in case. We also use Dropbox, where each agency has their own folder, but you do need an invite to access it. So if you need an invite, please reach out to SOR Support and we'll get you on there. And additionally, we'll email intake alerts and follow-up reminders directly to your inbox. The best practice I mentioned is in yellow, and it's the use of encrypted emails. Please use encrypted email again when sending out emails that contains client IDs or any private information. And also please reach out if you're not receiving any of these communications currently and you'd like to, and keep us informed of new staff doing GPRAs or leading your agency so that we can add them to these resources as well. And in this section, we'll go into some of the basics of when to complete the GPRA and how to complete it. So for the purposes of this training, we'll focus on the follow-up GPRA and presume that you have some understanding of what the GPRA is. If that's not the case and you're brand new to GPRA, we have a SOR 3 full intake training available on the resources section of our website. And that training goes into a deeper dive on what the GPRA and SOR funding is, along with all the information you'll need to complete an intake GPRA. And this is a broad overview of the 3 types of GPRA that can be completed. All 3 surveys are pretty similar, but they have slight differences. We'll go more in depth on what these differences are, but for now, the important thing to remember is that there are 3 different GPRA time points, and you should plan to do all 3 with every client. So there's 3 different surveys. So you can only do a maximum of 3 surveys per grant year. So that's 1 intake, 1 follow-up, and 1 discharge. For instance, if a client gets an intake GPRA and discharges from services, then they'll complete a discharge GPRA. But if they return for additional services later, they can't complete a second intake in that same grant period. So basically, you can't do 2 of the same surveys in a grant period, just 1. And on the left side there, we have follow-up data goals, which are set and monitored by SAMHSA and the state. The 80% SAMHSA follow-up rate only includes clients who were interviewed, not administrative follow-ups. We'll explain more about the difference between these 2 types of follow-ups later in the training, but administrative follow-ups should still be used if you can't get in contact with a client. And these follow-up data collection goals are at a statewide level, not at the CSB level. However, Omni provides your CSB or agency with the number of interview follow-ups you are reaching each month in a report. As for knowledge and progress tracking, collecting GPRAs at multiple time points allows us to analyze outcomes or change in clients' treatment trajectories over time. And now I will pass it back to Amanda, who will share information about when a follow-up or discharge GPRA should be completed.
Thanks, Mecha. So here's an overview of when the GPRA is completed. You'll complete the intake GPRA as soon as your client, as you can after the client enters treatment services that are funded by the SOR grant. The discharge GPRA will be completed with the client when they discharge from treatment services. Its timing can vary according to the client's treatment plan. And then the follow-up GPRA occurs 6 to 8 months after the intake GPRA. The date of the follow-up is based off of the intake GPRA date. So there's that 3-month follow-up window that you see on the slide, which opens up 5 months after the intake GPRA was completed. Now I have a couple of examples to kind of show you how this might play out in different scenarios. So say the intake GPRA is completed on October 1st with the client. The client is then discharged from services on February 1st, so the discharge GPRA is completed at that time with the client. Based on that October 1st intake GPRA, the follow-up window, 5 to 8 months after the intake, is March 1st to June 1st. So the follow-up GPRA can be completed anytime within that 3-month window. And of course, try to reach out to the client as early as you can in that window to improve the likelihood of completing that follow-up interview. As a reminder, even if a client discharges from services before the follow-up window, a follow-up is still required once that window opens. And also, even if a client discharges before a follow-up is completed, your agency should collect all 3 data points for each client who completes an intake GPRA. Outreach to clients should happen multiple times, making a concerted effort to schedule and complete interviews. And that follow-up GPRA interviews need to occur within the specified follow-up window. And then this example is just showing a reminder that if a client receives services through the follow-up window period, you would complete a follow-up GPRA during the window, and then a discharge GPRA is still required once the client stops receiving services funded by the SOR grant. So how is the GPRA completed? The client completes the GPRA with a staff member via an interview. The client cannot complete the GPRA on their own. The GPRA can be administered in person or virtually via telephone or online platform. And in terms of virtual platforms to use, platforms that are approved for providing telehealth services can be used for the GPRA. So follow your agency's rules about virtual contact. And then the GPRA can be administered by any staff at your agency. And just to consider, these following points: that the GPRA includes sensitive and personal questions, and that the administrator should participate or watch a recording of Omni's training session to be fully prepared. And just to reiterate, a client must be interviewed by a staff person. They should never personally complete a GPRA on their own. In terms of documentation, GPRA responses can be recorded directly into the online system, or you can use the paper survey and transfer responses into the online system within 4 days. We'll give some general tips in these next few slides, and then focus more specifically on tips related to the follow-up and discharge GPRAs later on in the training. Our first tip is to introduce each new section as you begin it, describing what will be covered. Note that some items are personal and sensitive, so take opportunities to remind the client that their responses are confidential. The GPRA survey itself often has an introductory paragraph to the sensitive sections, so you'll be prompted to read those aloud. And then prior to starting the interview, consider marking off the past 30 days on a calendar to help clients visualize it and help their recall for certain questions. Next, a reminder to please provide the client with the opportunity to answer all applicable questions. Read each question as it is written. You can explain the question after reading it, but that first read through, you really need to read it exactly as it's written. Read aloud only response options in lowercase lettering. Text surrounded by brackets should not be read to the client. And lastly, if a client declines to answer a question, mark refused. And then just a couple things I want to kind of reiterate here, drive home. So each applicable item requires a response, and that response can include refused. And it's especially important to note this because if you're doing paper administration and entering it online into the system later, when you come across that paper survey, if something's left blank, it doesn't make it clear whether the question was refused or simply not asked. So make sure to mark responses, including refused, to each question. And then a reminder to not read the response option refused out loud to the client. The question by question guide, or a Q by Q, as you might hear or see us refer to it, is a great tool to help understand each question of the GPRA. We strongly encourage you and your staff to familiarize yourselves with this resource. It's organized by the sections of the GPRA tool, so each section has an overview about the intent of the question, as well as definitions relevant to the items in that section. There may also be additional questions suggested to probe to more fully understand the client's response to a question. This tool is helpful if you aren't sure about a particular item, what's being asked, how to categorize certain responses, and more. The Q by Q also has appendices with expanded definitions of survey items and a list of commonly used substances. This tool really goes in depth, so it's helpful to review it prior to administering the survey, and it's not necessarily designed to be used alongside GPRA survey during administration. Here's an example of a question in the Q by Q. On the left is an example of a question exactly as it is in the GPRA. And then on the right, there are definitions and instructions to aid administration. So this can help you and the client to better understand the meaning of a question or why it's being asked. And it also highlights the skip pattern in the survey. And this is an overview of the workflow of the GPRA process. First, staff complete an intake GPRA interview with clients and enter this into the online system. This information is tracked in your agency's Dropbox folders, listing when clients' follow-up windows open and close, and we'll go over that a little bit later in the training more. Staff track this and contact clients once windows open. Staff then conducts the follow-up GPRA during the follow-up window and enter it into the online system. And once the client is discharged from services that are funded by the grant, staff complete the discharge GPRA with the client and enter it into the online system. As previously mentioned, the discharge may happen before the follow-up window opens. And that's it for this slide. Now I'll pass it to Cheryl.
All right, now I'm going to use my superpowers that we talked about earlier. So you and others at your agency may be familiar with the GPRA from other grants. But it's important to differentiate this SOR GPRA from other grants. There's just small differences between this and other grants GPRAs. There are a few questions that were added to this grants GPRA that are specific to the SOR 3 grant. So this next section of our training is specific to the follow-up GPRA at first. So the follow-up GPRA is a GPRA survey that's completed, as you've heard a couple times, approximately 6 months after the intake GPRA is. It's conducted with all clients who completed an intake GPRA. And then again, the follow-up window that opens 5 months after the intake GPRA and closes 8 months after the intake GPRA. And it's important that follow-up GPRAs occur during this window. You'll hear us talk about follow-up windows a lot. To meet SAMHSA grant goals and to systematize the data collection in order to generate sound and useful data for analyses. Really what we're looking for is an intake GPRA and a follow-up GPRA at roughly 6 months, so we can look at how things change for individuals using SOR services. So unlike the intake GPRA, there are 2 types of follow-up surveys. There is an interview follow-up survey and an administrative follow-up survey. So an interview one is conducted when you can contact a client and they're willing to complete the full GPRA interview. Sections A through H in the tool are completed, and we'll look at those sections, what those are in a little bit. An administrative follow-up GPRA is conducted when you are not able to contact a client or they're unwilling to complete the full GPRA interview. In this case, you'd only complete section A of the survey, which is only what we call administrative, non-interview information. But we do ask that you attempt as a best practice to contact clients throughout the follow-up window, starting early in the window, up to about 10 times if needed. And if you're unable to contact the client within the last couple of weeks of the window, then complete the administrative follow-up GPRA. So what is the follow-up status of the client? Functionally, this question is where you indicate in the GPRA whether you're completing an administrative or an interview GPRA. So when you select that you're completing a follow-up GPRA in the tool, you'll see this question asking the client's follow-up status. Conducting a full interview, you'd either select completed interview within a specified window or outside a specified window. One of the 2 options highlighted in the slide here. The survey online will know to direct you to section B, and also there are instructions in the paper survey about where to go next once you've selected those options. If you're conducting an administrative follow-up because you couldn't reach the client after repeated attempts, you'd select any of these options for that follow-up status. So any of these marks the completion of the follow-up survey. And again, in paper, there's written instructions that tell you that, and in the online system, it will automatically route you to the end of the survey. The follow-up GPRA, here's the A through H that we mentioned, consists of 8 sections, A through H, and we differentiate these as either administrative sections or interview sections, as I just mentioned. And when we say administrative section in this context, we mean those questions that can be completed by agency staff or those who do the GPRA with or without the client present, as they can be answered by referencing clients' charts or files. So for the follow-up, section A is administrative. In thinking of your agency's workflows, this could be pre-filled out by an agency staff person who's trained on the GPRA before the client's actual GPRA interview in order to save some time and be more efficient with your client. The interview sections do require the client to be present, either virtually or in person, as they themselves are going to provide the answers to the questions. So sections B through 8 are all part of the interview. This gives you an idea of section A through H and whether it is to be done administratively or whether it's part of the interview sections. The follow-up GPRA is very similar to the discharge GPRA that we're going to talk about shortly, and the follow-up status is unique to the follow-up GPRA. So here are some key questions on the follow-up. The client ID is the same number that you used for the intake GPRA. These must match. There's an authentication feature that's in place on the follow-up. and discharge GPRAs in the online system that will not let you move forward unless this number has a matching intake. So if you're having any troubles with this, reach out to the TA team and we can help troubleshoot that. We'll also provide an interview date, the date of admission to your services or program, and your agency name from a drop-down. For the which services are you reporting question, this will direct you to which subsequent section and questions to complete. If you're using the paper version, prompts following the survey type tell you where to go in the paper survey. And if you're using the online system, the appropriate subsequent questions will appear based on your response. So here we're looking at follow-ups. So the 6-month follow-up would be selected. Some more key questions. You'll indicate if you were able to contact the client with a yes or no. And then you'll click the follow-up status of the client and if the client is still receiving services from your program. After these questions, you'll be directed to section B, which is substance use and mental health history. If this is an interview or if this is administrative follow-up where you can't interview the client, the survey will be complete. And this is a screenshot of just some of these questions you'll see right there in that part. So now we're going to take you through the same kind of overview of the discharge GPRA. Now keep in mind, these are not separate surveys per se, they're built into one. They're contained within the same survey, both for paper and online. And you're directed to answer particular questions unique to each one by the survey instructions themselves or through skip logic, which we've programmed into the online survey tool. So the discharge GPRA, as we mentioned earlier, is completed when the client's no longer receiving services. Again, all clients who completed an intake, regardless of follow-up GPRA has yet been done or not, should complete discharge when it applies. And this can happen anytime after the intake survey, regardless of when the follow-up is completed or scheduled. So similar to the follow-up GPRA, there are two types of discharge GPRAs, an interview and administrative discharge GPRA. This follows the same logic as the follow-up GPRA, that is conducting an interview, discharge when you're able to contact and they're willing, and then completing sections A through H. Or if you're unable to contact that discharge client or they're unwilling to participate in the full GPRA interview, you'd complete an administrative GPRA for discharge and only section A. When you do select that you're completing a discharge GPRA, when you identify that in the online form, you need to specify what kind of discharge it is. If you're conducting a full interview, then select this highlighted option and complete a series of questions related to the client's discharge status. Then the survey will instruct you to go on to the rest of the survey. And if you're doing administrative discharge, similarly, you would check administrative and the survey will then know to direct you to a series of discharge status questions that apply and then complete the survey. So the discharge survey, just like the follow-up, has those same letters, A through H. It's just like the process for follow-up where the interview sections require the client to be present. They provide the answers and then the latter parts of section B through H are all interview questions. And here's a parallel graphic that shows you the discharge sections and whether it's administrative or interview. It's almost the same as the follow-up, except the one difference is a section called discharge status and services received. And I see some information in the chat. I didn't know if there were any questions to this point. It looks like my colleague Logan is fielding those questions. So Logan, just interrupt if there's anything that we need as we go along in this, or anyone, as we go along in our training here in this orientation. So there are 7 specific discharge questions, and this screenshot is just, there were too many to fit, so we just put a few on here. You'll indicate whether the discharge is interview or administrative, as we mentioned, the date of the client discharge, the status of the client's discharge? Did they complete, or were they terminated for some other reason? And the reasons that you can see listed here can be many. There are additional questions on HIV testing and referral, provision of naloxone or fentanyl test strips, and then COVID-19 vaccination status. In the intake GPRA, if you recall, if you're familiar with that, there are questions where you indicate the services a client is planned to receive. At the discharge, you indicate the services the client actually received while at your agency. So this table is almost exactly the same as the table of planned services done at intake, except this is asking for the number of days or sessions the client received these services during the course of their treatment or recovery. And what's entered on this table does not have to line up with what was entered as a planned service at intake, because we know the plan of care can change as time goes on, and you'd enter anything here that the client actually did receive, plus the actual number of days or sessions, as the case may be. There are several more questions that follow this big table that are important. Note that these questions we're showing here are not interview questions. They're contained in the administrative section of the discharge and reported by program staff. So discharge questions also explore the rate the client attended their planned services, the rate of telehealth, their virtual sessions, and a set of questions focused on whether the client has been previously diagnosed with an opioid use disorder and alcohol, stimulant, or tobacco use disorders. So this screenshot here just shows you one in a section of this discharge related to these points that I was making. And then you can see there's a question 10, has this client previously been diagnosed with an opioid use disorder, and some sub questions. You'll see similar breakouts like that for other substances listed on the slide. And again, these are in the administrative non-interview portion of the discharge. Okay, before we go any further, I just wanted to check and see if anyone had questions. We're gonna look more deeply at the actual tool at this point. So Logan, if you are able to put the link to the GPRA, I did share a version of this by email to all the registrants that I could reach. And if you wanted to have that open and follow along, we'll reference page numbers here or there. And again, you can also find that on our website if you don't have it handy. And it's not vital to follow along, but some folks like to. All right. So here are sections B through 8, and these are the interview portions of the follow-up and discharge GPRA. For these next slides, we're going to provide an overview of what each of these sections contains with some sample screenshots, and feel free to follow along. So section B, substance use and mental health history, starts on page 10. This long table lists 10 types of substances and seeks to determine the number of days the client reports using that substance in the past 30 days. And that's why that marking off a calendar, just, that would be from April 1st or April 15th to now or something, might be helpful as a prompt for your clients. The question also seeks the route by which the substance was used or ingested. So you would mark only one route, but if the client identifies more than one route, choose the corresponding one with the highest associated number value from 1 to 6. And responses should only capture the past 30 days of use. Basically, the GPRA or the client should be encouraged to list the substances on their own. If they're unsure, the list from the table can be read to the client to prompt them. Note that not all substance use is considered harmful or illicit. It may be a substance is prescribed by a licensed provider. Say if they're taking prescribed medication in accordance with official safety guidelines, it's not considered misuse, and you may seek to clarify this for particular medications. And in this case, I just thought I'd read what the interview script is right out of the GPRA. We'll start with questions about your substance use and mental health history. This section contains questions about diagnoses and treatments you've received. Remember, your answers to the survey are confidential and will not affect the treatment services you receive. You may choose to skip questions you don't want to answer. So during the past 30 days, on how many days have you used any substance and how do you take that substance? So that's sort of the GPRA defined intro to this table. Section B then continues. So this section also has interview questions asking the client about self-reported diagnoses with alcohol, opioid, stimulant, or tobacco use disorder. This screenshot shows one example of the types of sets of questions that you'll see related in this way. And there are additional questions that ask about overdoses, interventions, and treatment as well. It's a busy slide. I'll just let it linger there just for a moment. Okay. And section B continues again. This is a question about self-reported mental health diagnoses. Have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health illness by a healthcare professional? And if yes, you can see the capital letters, which are instructions to you. Please ask the client to self-report. Clients should be encouraged to report their own mental health illnesses, but if preferred, the list can be read to the client in a way that might make sense, maybe the overarching buckets, but please indicate all that would apply. And again, emphasizing confidentiality of the information that's collected. Finally, we move on to a new section, section C, living condition. This starts on page 16. It contains questions pertaining to the client's living situation, satisfaction with their living situations, as well as stress and mental health impact of substances. And there are sensitive and personal questions here and other places. As always, there's prompts at the start of each section that can be helpful to say to the client. As you can see here, these questions are confidential. You may choose to skip any of these questions they don't want to answer, and that it won't affect their services, and that they have the right to refuse any question. Section D is next, and that starts on page 18. It collects information about the client's educational, employment, financial resources, access to transportation. To ensure that the client gives an answer that corresponds to one of the response choices, only read and explain the choices if necessary. Usually people will just, you can see those are in capital letters. They should just be able to tell you, and you can find the correct place for those. Okay, did you have a question?
No, I was just having trouble with my.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right. Section E, you can see these sections are a little bit shorter than B. Section E starts on page 20. This section pertains to basic information about the client's involvement with the criminal justice system. This has been modified a bit since the prior GPRA and prior SOR 2 period. It gathers information about arrests and incarceration or detainment. Even if the client is court mandated to treatment, these questions must be asked and the client's answers recorded. There may be additional information that was not part of the court mandate. Some clients may be reluctant to offer this, and again, reassuring them of the confidentiality of this information will be important here. And you can see on the screen some examples of the questions being asked in the section E. Section F starts on page 21. It kind of like assesses quality of life concerns, satisfaction with overall health and ability to perform daily tasks, mental and emotional challenges, medical care, and health insurance. So it addresses issues of medical and physical health and treatment experiences in the past 30 days as well. The Q by Q that Amanda mentioned earlier, has some helpful definitions for this question, including the rationale for particular questions or that are asked or explanations of some of the question content. Again, some clients may be reluctant, and again, reassuring them of confidentiality and their as you go along. Section G is all on one page, page 23. These questions address the client's use of recovery services and social supports during the 30 days prior to the interview. So recovery group attendance, supportive interactions with family and friends, satisfaction with personal relationships are all explored here. And then section H, this starts on page 24. This includes the BARC 10, which stands for the Brief Assessment of Recovery Capital. It's a 10-item assessment that's used, oops, sorry, we're not breaking yet. It's a 10-item assessment that's used to gauge the level of broader personal, social, physical, and professional resources in an individual's environment that are used to initiate and sustain recovery, including structural supports, such as a recovery, supportive living space and community relationships, things like that. So you'd read each statement and ask the client their level of engagement or agreement from strongly disagree to strongly agree for each. It's useful to read all the points on the scale out loud for at least the first few statements or repeat it periodically throughout to make sure they're remembering what those points are. And at the end of the online survey, when you're in there, you can request that a summary of the client's BARC 10 scores be emailed to you or to an additional person if you'd like. On our website, we have a helpful one sheet that kind of explains a little bit more about the utility and the usefulness and the importance of these particular indicators. We encourage you to check it out. And now I wanted to introduce our break with my fancy slide there, which I revealed too soon, but we're going to just take 5 minutes and stretch your legs or do whatever. And then we'll come back at 10 minutes till the hour, and we'll continue on with the rest of our training. All right. So the next section of our training's been developed to help support your workflows and planning regarding the completion of follow-up GPRAs and discharge GPRAs. We have a TA sheet that's called GPRA Follow-up and Discharge Information Sheet, and it contains this chart. You can find that on our website, but this is a helpful overview of the workflow in completing the follow-up and discharge GPRAs. And starting with the follow-up GPRA, the action steps you need to take hinge upon whether or not, of course, you're able to contact the client. And as we mentioned, if yes, you would conduct section A and complete the yes flow, and if no, the other there. And we also have a similar workflow that's listed for the discharge. I walked you through some of the questions that would be answered in each of these scenarios to indicate that status. But this just sort of like provides the workflow for this process. So here's one scenario that you may or may not encounter. It does happen sometimes. So when a discharge and a follow-up occur together or very close in time, that if a client's discharged during their follow-up window, there's the possibility for you to use the same interview GPRA portion for both surveys. So if a client's due for a discharge and a 6-month follow-up within 10 days of each other, the GPRA responses from the first GPRA, whichever that is, may be saved and used for the second GPRA. So if a client's discharged in their 6-month follow-up window and a follow-up interview's not been conducted, you can complete the interview discharge and then use that same data to enter into the interview follow-up portion of the survey. And in reverse, the same if you do the interview for follow-up first, you can use that data for the interview discharge. So in order to do this, you'd need to have a copy of those responses. So you can download the very first survey response PDF when you finish the online survey. And we did have a glitch, but we fixed that recently. So it's available now for the follow-up. You would download the first survey response PDF when you're finished entering the online survey. The system kind of asks you if you want a copy and provides a link. And then you would use that PDF of your response set to re-enter this data under the alternate survey type, either a follow-up or discharge. So if you realize you'd like to do this but did not download the first survey response, you can reach out to Omni and we can provide you with a copy of your first survey response PDF. It's important, though, to point out that the administrative questions for the follow-up and discharge differ. So the entire thing would not be the same. You would need to fill out that non-interview section for either the follow-up or discharge, and then you can reuse the interview information. As long as those dates are pretty close, because the logic is that there wouldn't be that many different responses from one time point to the other. So this does help truncate some of the workload in some cases. All right, well, now I'm going to turn it back to Amanda, who's got some helpful tips and strategies to share with you.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to talk about how to work with clients to complete all 3 GPRAs and engage them in that process. So what we've heard from agencies is that the 2 biggest hurdles to completing the follow-up and discharge GPRAs are reaching the client and client engagement. So while there are many reasons you would not be able to reach a client or for a client to refuse, some of which are out of your or your client's control, in the next slides, we'll discuss some resources and guidelines to hopefully set you all up for success. So first, capturing accurate and complete contact information when completing the intake GPRA is really important. On the SOR support website, you'll find the client locator form, which can help track this information you receive from the client. We recommend, if possible, updating or confirming this information with clients whenever you work with them. And this also can serve as a kind of touch point that they will be asked to complete the follow-up and discharge GPRAs. So here's an overview of the information collected on the client locator form. In addition to the basics you see on the left, there's some space on the right for additional contacts like friends, sponsors, mentors, caseworkers, POs, etc. Be sure to receive permission from the client to contact these individuals before reaching out to them. And on the form itself, it seeks permission from the client to mention to these additional contacts that a treatment provider is calling and that the client is participating in a health survey. So we've heard from agencies that increasing client buy-in through sharing the purpose of the GPRA improves the chance of getting a follow-up interview scheduled. So the Omni team created this handout. We call it a client engagement sheet, and it's client-facing. It's designed to be given to the client and talked through to explain fundamental questions about the GPRA, why they're being asked to complete it, what may be gained from their participation. So please share it with them and use it as a resource to get some buy-in from the client in participating. And then lastly, the most tangible tool we have in client engagement is incentives. So this is an overview of incentives and contingency management. So with the completion of a GPRA follow-up interview, completion of a GPRA follow-up interview can be incentivized with a $30 gift card from any store, but it cannot be exchanged for cash. These gift cards can be bought with SOR funds and are managed by your agency. And then contingency management is a formal term for incentivizing engagement or components of treatment. It's also one of the 4 main ways for doing stimulant disorder treatment. SAMHSA allows contingency management per wording of the grant, and it should be built into each CSB SOR budget if they're doing it. If contingency management is used by your agency, the funds can be used to incentivize completion of a GPRA interview at intake, follow-up, or discharge. And contingency management can include anything valued at $15 or less. Contingency management also tends to be doled out in a mix between gift cards like grocery store gift cards, gas cards, bus passes, or other transportation funds. The main restrictions are that you can't give out cash or a cash-like gift card, such as a Visa gift card. And then a special note that for justice-involved clients, they cannot receive gift cards or contingency management funds while in the justice setting. And then I'll pass it to Swetcha.
All right, we are headed into our last section of the training. Note that we have a separate recorded training for the intake GPRA to fully cover all the specifics, but we'll cover the basics of tracking to support the follow-up and discharge GPRA for now, so folks are ready and can start planning for this. You'll find that your agency will end up with a lot of info to keep track of. To keep track of everything, we share that Dropbox folder with you that's specific to your agency and securely shared with only folks at your agency. This Dropbox folder will have the tracking sheets that are updated on a weekly basis to track all of the completed intake GPRA info and to tell you when follow-ups need to be started. That screenshot on this slide is what the Dropbox folder will look like. Each week, a new tracking sheet will be added that contains all of the clients that have completed an intake GPRA already. And since we're adding new sheets so frequently, they'll be deleted eventually, but you can absolutely download them if you would like to keep them. And Omni will be responsible for updating this document every week, but you all are responsible for using this information to inform your tracking and follow-up efforts. And if you have any questions about accessing the Dropbox or would like to add other staff members to your team's Dropbox, please reach out to us. And this is what the Dropbox page on our SOR website looks like. So you can follow the directions on this webpage to access your agency's Dropbox folder. On the bottom of the picture, you'll see it says CSV Dropbox resource, and that page provides information on how to get access to the folder and how to set up the folder in your Dropbox account. And again, if you have any questions or something is unclear, always feel free to submit a request TA form or email us. And that is what you'll see on the header of that tracking sheet. On the left side, you'll see your CSV, your agency's name, the date of the weekly sheet you're looking at, and the number of intakes at your site so far. And on the right there, you'll see a couple of follow-up alerts telling you how many clients are eligible to receive a follow-up at the time of the tracking sheet, and how many clients have follow-up windows that will be closing within the next 2 weeks. And if you find that you want more information, we also just posted a news article on the website about the tracking sheet and how to use it. And here are the columns that are in the tracking sheet. We show you only 2 rows of data here, but each row contains all data for any one client. So first is that client's ID, then if they're a justice involved client or not, the intake GPRA date and the date when the follow-up window opens, which is 5 months after the intake GPRA, when the follow-up window closes, then whether the follow-up window is upcoming, open, closed, or completed. It'll also show the date of the follow-up GPRA if it's been completed, if a discharge GPRA has been completed. And lastly, it'll show which type of discharge GPRA was completed. Wade, did you have a question?
Yeah, this was tracking the like if they're required to do like some AA or NA groups for their self-helps before they actually get out of our program. And I see on the tracking sheet where it talks about how many like intervention classes or IOP classes that we provided. Is when the where does the like is AA or NA something we're supposed to track? I mean, I see the social connectiveness thing, but that's not, where was the part? Wait a minute.
I think this tracking sheet that you're seeing here, Wade, this is particularly just for like workflow tracking.
Oh yeah, no,
like,
I'm sorry. That's not on this.
okay.
No, that's a different question I'll get to after you finish. I know this thing.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So maybe at the end, and we can see if we can figure it out for you. And if not, as always, we can get back to you and the group with questions that we might not know the answer to immediately. So,
Cheryl,
Um,
I did actually want to highlight another question as I wasn't too sure of the response. I wanted to see if you knew. It was from Dr. Jessica Dennis, and it was about contingency management and incentives. She said, our city has issue with giving gift cards, but does that mean the incentives are $15 or it can be $30 worth of goodies? We were doing COVID things inside bags.
Good question. I know under the SOR 3 funding, I think it is only a gift card that can be given at the follow-up interview time point. I don't know about in-kind. I know for contingency management, there are some opportunities to give in-kind types of gifts. So you're probably wondering about the value or something, but the $15 only applies to contingency management if your agency is implementing that. $30 would be kind of the SOR 3 approved incentive value at follow-up interview only. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Dr. Dennis.
Hello. Yes, it does. I know that there's been a lot of emails back and forth since it is a city problem, not necessarily an agency problem. So I'll just have to go back to trying to find it. It's just the person that coordinated all of that is no longer with my agency. So I'm trying to recreate the answers.
Oh yeah, I think I remember hearing in a prior training that there were some challenges or resistance or inability to use gift cards, but the SOR 3 funding does allow for it, and for that follow-up time point. So whether there's contingency management in place you're with Portsmouth, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not, so you'd have to maybe check with the budget folks and who has oversight over that to see. Is that helpful, or did I confuse matters?
No, it's fine. We can talk later because it's a city thing. We can't buy gift cards as a city. It's not necessarily a budgeting, like all of the people know that we could, but it's just that higher ups are not allowing us to make that purchase.
Interesting.
So we're trying to figure out other ways to be creative when it comes to the incentive. And so that's why I was just curious.
Okay, well, that's a good question for us. You know, we've been meaning to put together a little bit of a one sheet about incentives, because we do get questions like this it doesn't fit neatly into our bucket of what we know. And maybe we can put that as food for thought into something like that for when these different types of scenarios arise. And then, of course, after the training, we'll get a little more concrete advice for you. And we could share with the larger group in a news post. We'll share like the recording. And if there were any questions like this, we'll just do like a little bit of questions that came up during the training and responses to that, so we can flesh it out a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. All right. I think we're still on with Swetcha. I just wanted to note that we don't see here on this tracking sheet, there's a notes column as well, where Omni can note for you in the tracking sheet if there are issues that are coming up with your GPRAs, like if there's 2 follow-up GPRAs for the same person, or if a client happens to be deceased, that'll be noted and so forth. So explore those weekly, get used to seeing them. It'll help you stay on track with your timing. And so I'll turn it back to Swetcha.
Yeah, and so to finish off, progress reports. So progress reports are also in the Dropbox folder, and they're updated monthly. And these reports have information on total intakes, follow-ups, and the discharges at your CSB. And revamp progress reports for SOR 3 will be coming after April. Now that follow-ups are starting to come in, as that above sample shows. And these will be located in your agency's Dropbox as well, and they're also announced by email. And if you find that you need to change something in a GPRA survey, you can email us or use the website's TA request form. Please don't send confidential info like the client's ID via unencrypted email or TA request form, Instead, send an encrypted email or request an encrypted email to respond to with the confidential info. On Omni's end, we can make changes to the data and reopen a GPRA and give you that link to go back in so that you can make changes or continue if you accidentally X'd out of it. And now I'll pass it back to Cheryl to go over the next steps and answer any questions folks have.
Yeah, so we're getting near here to the end. So for next step, just like you to review the SOR website that we've been touting and all the available resources to you. And while you're there, stop by the news post area of the website, and you can read a most recent post that we did about tracking sheets that might help you get a better grip on what those are for and how to use them. As we announce them, register for upcoming trainings or review any of our prior trainings to support your use of the GPRA. So once again, the intro or the full GPRA training on the intake is really the go-to place for any new staff or folks who are going to be trained on the GPRA. We have other trainings. We have a refresher training. We have, a training that identifies the new GPRA tool that we're using now and how that's different from the old one. So there are a few things for you, but again, that go-to training would be the full intake GPRA training that we have on our website. Very helpful. And then we always encourage you to keep in touch with us. We're here to support you. I think it was Amanda or maybe Swetcha described the different ways that we keep in touch with you. How our team works is we have a common email address, which is sorsupport@omni.org. And we work on a weekly rotation to monitor and respond to emails there. So you might hear from all of us at one time or another. So, but feel free to email. Again, there's no such thing as silly questions or too much TA. We'd love to be able to support you in this important work that you're doing, of course. And then we can take questions. I know Wade had one, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer it, but if there are others that have questions about anything related to our content today, now's the time to put it in chat or to just feel free to unmute. We'll do our best to answer. And of course, if we don't know the answer or we want to provide more fleshed out answers, we'll do a little bit of a FAQ in our news post about this training.
I think Logan kind of got to me on this one. This was really under the services received under the grant funding on the discharge one.
Okay.
When the case management, and the assessment, I know they do an in and out. So that's 2. The case management is usually 1 unless, there's special situations and they go back. And I know the outpatient therapy, those people are always 20. The intensive outpatient depends on the counselor, so I get a different number. But I was just curious. I was asking her, the counselors require them to do so many hours of self-help or AA or NA. And I was putting that under, I don't know, just others. I didn't know if it was specific, if we just put it under other services, because we're not providing it. It's just
right.
They're required to do it.
I think that's okay to capture that there. I would say find the best place. I don't know if the Q by Q might be helpful for describing what goes into what bucket. Okay. I could stop sharing my slide and share the
Oh, and I know one I was messing up too was the screenings, because it says screening, and at first I thought that meant the drug and alcohol screenings we do.
Oh, yeah.
And then it says drug and alcohol, so I didn't know if that was a severe tracking issue or,
Is that so you're talking about the services received under the grant funding that gets completed at discharge?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
Under A at the bottom part where it's, Logan told me where to look. Wait a minute.
There's a section
services received under, right.
And then there's a section on the modality. So that's where all the case management, outpatient treatment, different types, medication. Then there's the treatment services.
And so I didn't know, so aftercare, self-help, support groups, you know, but they're actually doing it while they're with us, so I didn't know if that was really
Well,
aftercare.
at the time that they're discharged, I guess, like how many sessions have they received at that moment, up to that moment, I guess. Is that helpful?
Yes, I mean, if they're doing 20 classes required, and then they're required to do 20 AA and NA, would you call, I mean, are you calling what I call that aftercare, or what I just put it under other?
I'm not sure where that would be
specify services
categorized.
AA, NA 20, or
Yeah,
does it-
I'm not sure. In the Q by Q, it might describe more about like, what do we mean by aftercare?
right.
I can't look at right now, or
Okay.
other could be a place for that. And then it would be the number of days or number of sessions during their treatment. So add them all up, kind of a
Mhm.
thing. Okay. Any other questions for our group? Not hearing much. I don't see any chat actions. So sounds like we're nearing the end, and you can always email us, because a lot of times things will come up after the fact. We're like, shoot, I should have asked that question. Just drop us an email at sorsupport@omni.org. And then we also will prepare this recording and the slides and make those available on our website and announce that, as well as try to supply any answers or like things that came up that we think you might find helpful from our, links to different documents and things that we were talking about today. So if everybody feels ready, I think we can call it a day. I so appreciate everyone chiming in on their superpower, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks.